AIA B101, B102, B201, B202, and B203 flashcards. Which form is the standard form of agreement between owner and architect? B101 is the standard form of agreement between owner and architect. What are the major sections of B101? B101 includes initial information, architect's responsibilities, scope of basic services, supplemental and additional services, owner's responsibilities, cost of work, copyright and licenses, claims and disputes, termination or suspension, miscellaneous provisions, compensation, special terms and conditions, and scope of agreement. What form is attached to the B101 as the Sustainable Projects Exhibit? E204 is the Sustainable Projects Exhibit. Under the B101, the owner retains which consultants? Under the B101, the owner's consultants include the civil engineer, geotechnical engineer, and any other listed engineer in the contract. Under the B101, the architect retains which consultants? Under the B101, the architect retains structural, mechanical, and electrical. What types of insurance must the architect have per the contract? Per the B101, the architect must have commercial general liability, automobile liability, workers' compensation, employer's liability, and professional liability. The two types of insurance that are mandatory by law in California are automobile liability and workers' compensation if you have employees. What party must be included in the architect's liability? The owner. The architect is responsible for the owner-hired consultants. Is this true? The architect is not responsible for the owner-hired consultants unless specified in the contract. The architect's role is to coordinate its services with services of owner consultants. Basic services do not include managing the owner's consultants, just coordinating the architect's work with the owner's consultant's work. Who is responsible to contact the governmental authorities required to approve construction documents and entities providing utility services to the project? The architect and their team needs information from the utility to be able to design the project and coordinate where the points of connections will be. This must occur early in the design phase since it will impact the design, so it is the architect's responsibility. What's the first service of an architect provided under the schematic design phase in the B101 contract? The architect's first service is to prepare preliminary evaluation of the owner's program, schedule, budget, site, and then notify the owner of any inconsistencies. During the schematic design phase, what are the architect's primary deliverables? The deliverables include the site plan, building plans, sections, elevations, preliminary building systems, and construction materials to be noted. What items does the architect submit for owner approval at the end of each phase? The architect must submit the cost of work and design documents from that phase. What are design development deliverables per the B101? Design development deliverables include plans, sections, elevations, typical construction details, diagrammatic layout of building systems to fix and describe the size and character of elements that are related to structural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. The architect should also include design specifications. What are the construction document phase deliverables? drawings, specifications, list of submittals. During the construction documents development, the architect must also prepare procurement information, time, place, conditions of bidding and bidding forms, the form of agreement between the owner and the contractor, conditions of the contract for construction, including the general, supplementary, and other conditions, and the project manual, which includes bid requirements and forms, the agreement between owner and contractor, conditions of the contract, and specifications. During the procurement phase, or bidding and negotiation, what does the architect assist the owner with? During the bidding and negotiation or procurement phase, the architect must establish a list of prospective contractors, obtain competitive bids or negotiated proposals, confirm responsiveness of bids or proposals, award and prepare contracts for construction. Under competitive bidding, the architect assists the owner in bidding the project by. Under competitive bidding, the architect assists the owner in bidding by distributing the bid documents to prospective bidders, organizing and conducting pre-bid conference, preparing responses to questions, providing clarifications to prospective bidders, organize and conduct opening of bid documents and distribute bidding results as directed by the owner. If the bid documents permit substitutions upon owner written authorization as an additional service, the architect can consider substitution requests and distribute addenda to all bidders. Under negotiated proposals, the architect assists the owner by doing what? Under negotiated proposals, the architect must facilitate distribution of proposal documents, organize and participate in selection interviews with prospective contractors, clarify questions in addenda, participate in negotiations, and prepare a summary report. What is the architect's role when visiting the site during the construction phase? The architect's role is to visit the site, report known deviations from the contract documents, or known deviations from the construction schedule, or any deficiencies observed. These must be reported to the owner. After consulting with the owner, the architect has the authority to reject work. Does the architect approve submittals? The architect reviews submittals. They approve, but this only means they've checked for conformance. If after approval an error is found in the submittal, it is still the contractor's responsibility. Many architects don't use the word approved on a submittal stamp. Instead, they have the word reviewed. It is the architect's role to maintain a record of all submittals. What is the architect responsible to do during project completion? The architect is responsible to conduct inspections to determine the date of substantial completion and the date of final completion. They also have the responsibility to issue the certificate of substantial completion. They will forward to the owner all warranties received from the contractor. And finally, they will issue a final certificate for payment upon final inspection. Who accompanies the architect on inspections during substantial completion? The owner must accompany the architect during the inspection of substantial completion. What must be forwarded to the owner from the contractor at final completion? Consent of surety, affidavits, releases, waivers of liens, bonds, indemnifying the owner against liens, and any other document required from the contractor. What are examples of supplemental services in the B101? Programming, site evaluation and planning, architect coordination of owner consultants, to name a few. What are examples of additional services during construction administration where the architect can charge for those services? Responding to RFIs when the info is already in the construction documents, evaluating extensive number of claims, evaluating substitutions and having to update the instruments of service, and finally, if the construction phase services are provided more than 60 days after substantial completion, then the architect can charge for additional services. What is not included in the cost of work? The cost of work does not include compensation of the architect, the cost of the land, right-of-way, financing, and any contingencies. Those are the owner's responsibility. What happens if procurement phase hasn't started 90 days after the architect submits construction documents to the owner? The owner's cost of work budget must be adjusted. If the owner requires the architect to modify construction documents because the lowest bid or negotiated proposal exceeds the budget due to an unanticipated market condition, it's an additional service. How many days' notice must the architect provide if they wish to suspend services? 7-day written notice to the owner. If the owner suspends the project for more than 90 cumulative days, the architect can terminate the agreement with a 7-day notice. Who signs the B101 contract? The architect and owner. In what law and contract is the standard of care legally described? The architect's standard of care is described in the California Code of Regulations, Division 16, under the Rules of Professional Conduct. The standard of care is also included in the AIA B101 contract, Article 2, under Architect's Responsibilities. What is the standard of care included in the B101? When practicing architecture, the architect shall act with reasonable care and competence, apply technical knowledge and skill ordinarily applied by architects in good standing, practicing in this state under similar circumstances and conditions. Let's repeat. When practicing architecture, the architect shall act with reasonable care and competence, apply technical knowledge and skill ordinarily applied by architects in good standing, practicing in this state under similar circumstances and conditions. Per the A201, who can stop work on a project? The owner, authority having jurisdiction, and contractor. That being said, really anyone can stop the work on a project in reality, but it's a huge liability, especially for the architect. Responsible control must be exercised on what types of services? Responsible control by the architect must be exercised over all the architect's instruments of services. This is outlined in the Practice Act. What are the architect's options when it comes to an application for payment? If the application for payment is correct, the architect may issue a full amount of certificate of payment. If it is partially correct, then the architect can issue a partial amount that the architect determines is properly due, or the architect may withhold certification of full amount, notify the contracting owner, and ask the contractor to fix the amount. What is the owner's responsibility for programming in the B101 contract? To provide program to the architect, and the architect must review the programming and any owner-furnished documents. How much time does the owner have from the date of substantial completion to meet with the architect if they find an issue in the building? The owner has 1 year from substantial completion. What limits the architect's liability? Periodic observation of the work to determine general compliance. The contractor is ultimately responsible. Stamping drawings poses no legal obligation to perform construction administration services. The architect is also not responsible if construction documents are changed without their knowledge. And finally, in an emergency, if an architect is called upon to inspect a building or site The architect is not liable for inspections done in good faith that result in negligence. What is the architect's role during construction administration? The architect's role is threefold. First, to visit job site at appropriate intervals. Second, determine if contractor's work is built per the contract documents and capture it in a report. And third, report findings to the owner. Why must the architect report all non-conforming work to the owner per the A201? Before rejecting non-conforming work, the architect must report to the owner because of A201. The owner has the right to accept non-conforming work. If the owner rejects the work, then the architect can reject the work. If a consultant requests the architecture team to include that consultant's drawings within the architect's backgrounds, what's the architect's responsibility? Reject the request. Those drawings were not produced under the architect's responsible control. What needs to happen if there's conflicting information in contract documents? The contractor must clarify with the architect via a request for information or RFI. Otherwise, the contractor is responsible for building per the contract documents. What is the contractor's role during construction administration? The contractor's role during construction administration is to build the work per the contract documents. They are not responsible for code compliance. If they do notice errors in the construction documents, they must notify the architect. When does the architect's contract officially end during construction administration? Upon issuing the final certificate for payment. What type of dispute resolution is binding and confidential? Arbitration is binding and confidential. Litigation, on the other hand, is binding and held publicly. Per the AIA Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct, list each canon. Canon 1, General Obligations. Canon 2, Obligations to the public. Canon 3, Obligations to client. Canon 4, Obligations to profession. Canon 5, Obligations to colleagues. And number 6, Obligations to the environment. Per the Architects Practice Act, if an architect has a judgment against them that is based on fraud, deceit, negligence, incompetence, and recklessness that is greater than $5,000, what is the architect's responsibility? The architect must report the matter to the California Architects Board within 30 days. What are causes for disciplinary action per the Architects Practice Act? Disciplinary action can result from obtaining a license by fraud or misrepresentation, impersonating an architect. Licensed architect aids someone that is not allowed to practice architecture. Instruments of service are not prepared under the architect's responsible control, allowing another to use your license. If a licensee is guilty of fraud, if there is negligence or willful misconduct, incompetency, recklessness, or a public agency takes action against an architect. Per the Architects Practice Act, any licensee who fails to comply with Article 5, what penalty is imposed by the California Architects Board? The architect must pay between $100 up to $1,000 as an intermediate sanction imposed by the board in lieu of revoking their license. If the architect intentionally fails to comply, civil penalties are up to $20,000. What are the two major inspections the architect performs during construction phase? Substantial completion and final completion. Everything else prior to that is an observation. The owner should be present for the punch list walk. What is the form of the agreement between owner and architect without a predefined scope of services? B102. How is the B102 organized? Architect's responsibilities, owner responsibilities, copyright and licenses, claims and disputes, termination or suspension, compensation, miscellaneous provisions, special terms and conditions, scope of the agreement. What agreement is the B102 and B201 similar to? The B102 and B201 is similar to the comprehensive B101. The B102 is simply the terms and conditions of the contract. What document is the standard form of agreement of architect services for design and construction contract? The B201. It provides the architect services only and must be used with an ownership architect agreement, such as the B102. What's the standard form of architect services for programming? B202. The B202 would be used with the B102, again, the standard terms and conditions. The standard form of agreement between architect and owner with a predefined scope of architect's services. How is the B202 organized? Initial information, programming services, supplemental and additional services, owner's responsibilities, compensation, attachments and exhibits. How are programming services defined? Identifying, discussing, and prioritizing values, goals, and objectives to establish performance and design criteria for the project, per the B202. Per the B202, what is the architect's responsibility for updating periodically for decisions required by the owner? The architect must update the schedule for programming services. What's included when identifying project values, goals, and objectives? The architect must facilitate a visioning session with stakeholders to identify goals around institutional purpose and growth, culture, technology, aesthetics, symbols, economics, environment, social, safety, sustainability, and more. They must provide the owner a written evaluation of prioritized values and goals for approval. What types of project-related information should be included in the information gathering stage? Per the B202, the information gathering stage must include data on existing facilities, land surveys, record documents as applicable, documents from the authority having jurisdiction, non-government building and planning standards, or relevant historical documents and archived materials. What is the architect's responsibility when it comes to interviews under the programming B202 contract? To assist the owner and identify individuals to be interviewed, to create a schedule for interviews, to determine data that's needed for the project, to determine how interviews will relate to other information gathering sessions. If there are existing facilities, what's the architect's responsibilities under the programming contract? To conduct a walkthrough and prepare space inventory, identify traffic and circulation patterns, and adequacy of spaces to accommodate users, to prepare a written description with graphic illustrations if needed for space utilization, area allowances, adjacencies, communication, technology, and security. What's the data analysis stage of the B202 contract? This is where you develop performance and design criteria, make preliminary determination of space requirements, space relationships, circulation, aesthetics, ergonomics, flexibility, furnishings, furniture and equipment, safety, and more. What is the initial program document and presentation? The architect must compile results from values, goals, and objectives, the information gathering stage, and the data analysis stage. In an initial program document, these are put together for the owner. An architect must present these to the owner and programming participants. What's included in the development of the final program of project requirements? Based on owner approval of initial program documents, the architect prepares a final program document. The architect must incorporate owner facility standards and recommend their own project standards. The following must be included for space requirements: the required spaces, size and relationship of spaces, establishing efficiency factors, and documenting special requirements for various disciplines. What's included in the final programming document? The executive summary, document of methodology used to develop the program, value and goal statements, relevant facts upon which the program was based, photo documentation of relevant site and building features, aspirational images, conclusions derived from data analysis, relationship diagrams, flow diagrams, matrices of space allocations and relationships, space listings by function and size, and space diagrams to convey program information. What two things does the architect review and provide an opinion of? The owner's budget and project schedule, and whether it will meet or exceed or fall short of all of the information gathered during this stage. What are supplemental services in the programming contract B202? Supplemental services include site evaluation and project feasibility, site planning, master planning, preliminary design, cost estimating, project schedule, market analysis, detailed facility evaluation, questionnaires and surveys, existing FF&E inventory, FF&E programming services. Which form is the standard form of architect's services? The B203 is a standard form of architect services for site evaluation and project feasibility. It is often used together with the B102 standard form of agreement between owner and architect without predefined scope of services. How is B203 organized? The initial information, site evaluation and project feasibility services, additional services, owner responsibilities, compensation, special terms and conditions. What's the site evaluation and project feasibility services? To research applicable design criteria, attend project meetings, communicate with the team, and report progress to the owner. What does the architect periodically update? Site evaluation and project feasibility services schedule with the owner's project schedule. What should be included in the site evaluation and feasibility report? The executive summary, methodology used to provide services under this contract, owner's development objectives, relevant facts, comparisons of multiple sites if selected, and conclusions and recommendations. What services can be included or not included in this agreement? The following are services that can be included: preliminary assessment of owner's objectives, site evaluation, environmental requirements, site context description, cultural factor assessment, historic resource inventory, building evaluation, conceptual drawings, estimate of cost of work, public hearings and meetings, and other.